Hey everybody, it's Todd Dills here, back with another edition of Overdrive Radio. This one dropping on Monday, October 25th, for a bit of a change from our usual Friday release. Consider this a bit of a follow-up to Overdrive executive editor Alex Lockheed's reporting on the intermodal niche, released a week and a half ago, and the system-wide backlogs being experienced all around the container-moving supply chain, particularly evident at the nation's West Coast ports. What we didn't get to in that three-part report was a perspective from among the top volume ports on the East Coast. For that, I reached out to small fleet owner-operator George Berry, working out of the Port of Virginia principally. He's a uniquely qualified source to voice owner-operators' views on just where congestion issues at the ports originate. For years now, he's been a voice in a group called For Truckers by Truckers, on social media, around port and other intermodal drivers' issues. And his small fleet leases with 5 owner-operators now out of Virginia. For Truckers by Truckers continues today. As he puts it,
so we're still on track and trying to be more of an informational source now for drivers. So just tell them about, what is actually happening industry-wide, not just our area. So stretching our scope. We're making some traction in that area. So
since the President of the United States raised port issues as a national concern almost 2 weeks ago, there's been no small amount of finger-pointing as to just who's to blame in the days since among supply chain parties. As George Berry tells it, the backlog issue is multifaceted.
Folks have to understand, just because that vessel is offloaded and that freight comes off, doesn't mean that freight is leaving immediately out of the port.
Containers sit for days in stacks that have to be routinely sorted for pickup with complicated machinery, of course, and when ready to go onto a truck.
Another issue we're having is what we call the chassis shortage. The chassis is the frame, for those that don't know, that the container sits on when it leaves out the port. That's how we're able to transport it.
If the owner-operator is lucky enough to get an open chassis, new pressures bear down upon arrival.
Then they have to go to the port, and where they may be an extended amount of time there for the machinery to deliver the containers.
It's good news for that common problem, even in intermodal work, where quote-unquote free detention time is dwindling at receivers, and commonly low intermodal owner-op revenue levels annually are rising.
So typically, owner-operators grossing about $100K a year.
Okay.
That's owner-operators. But I think that earning potential has risen at least by $50K on top of that right now.
An easy calculation there would give us a 50% increase in earning potential with new demand and relatively shorter supply. That's a major positive, Berry said he hopes continues, as it's long overdue.
Drivers really want to make that revenue that they duly deserve and have earned over these decades of low wages.
And before we really dive into it fully with the small fleet owner for a little more of his history, here's a word from Overdrive Radio's sponsor.
First Guard provides commercial truck insurance to leased owner-operators done right, as we've done for more than 80 years. We provide physical damage and non-trucking. Many companies make you pay up to 6 months of insurance premiums up front, but not First Guard. We bill monthly, so you get quality insurance without needing to pay a lot of cash up front. Go to firstguard.com. That's 1stguard.com. First Guard. We speak trucker. Let's talk.
In 2004, I started off as a company driver for a company called D.D. Jones in this local area, which had been around many, many, many years. And that's where I first got my start, driving their day cabs, doing some local container drays. And then I purchased my own truck a year and a half later, and I began my endeavor as an independent trucker, independent contractor, owner operator.
Yep.
And did that for several years. And then the growing frustration of the congestion at the ports of Virginia led me to establish this organization, For Truckers by Truckers, to advocate for our port drivers and also just be a voice in the industry for change. So as that progressed, as we began to see, when I say we, I mean the staff at the time, For Truckers by Truckers, we began to see the need for maybe consolidating our efforts into a terminal, becoming our own motor carrier. That way we would have more control over rates, and just to learn the ins and outs of the motor carrier side of the table. So me and my then business partner, Brandon, we opened FTBT Transport, which is a subsidiary of Pioneer Transport, who is our parent company, our corporate office. And that was in 2015. And from there, I'm the sole owner now of FTBT Transport and the only agent for Pioneer Transport in the state of Virginia. So what we're trying to do is just increase our fleet of trucks right now, but we are having a lot of difficulty in doing that.
And why? Barry chalks a lot of it up to difficulties in recruiting and retention, a quote-unquote shortage of drivers interested in doing intermodal work out of the Port of Virginia at Hampton Roads. Barry's business leases on owner-operators there, and equipment issues and parts shortages have increased the frustration for many in recent times, in addition to other long ongoing frustration at the ports.
When they say the supply chain is disrupted, I couldn't agree more. I'll give you an example, and I'm chuckling because I'm thinking of the story that happened yesterday. I was at the parts store, and a lady driver came in and she asked for a gallon of oil. And the parts service representative, he said that I can sell you the oil, but it can only be in 5-gallon jugs because we have no 1-gallon jugs of oil right now. And which sounds bizarre to me. I remember there was times where you can get that stuff. It was just stacked. There was pallets full of it. Right. And his reason from what I guess he's being told is that there's not any empty gallons. The bottles that hold the oil are perhaps on these cargo vessels that we see mooring off the coast of on the East Coast and West Coast. Yeah. So that is problematic when we're starting to see those effects. I think these are the beginning stages of what is going to be a huge disruption in commerce and, as they say, the supply chain. And I don't think regular folks out there who are not in our industry are privy to what's sort of happening behind the scenes understand the gravity of what this actually means for our nation and perhaps for the world, because this is undoubtedly the global supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, to explain it to us, like what's because ever since we've been this has been rumbling around here for quite a long time, particularly in the community that I'm operating in. There's a lot of owner operators, all over the country, most of them not working out of the port area, but the difficulty sourcing parts has been going on all year, and seeming to get worse, just judging by what I hear from folks. When it comes to the supply chain broadly, and people talk about the global supply chain, and you've got the president last week who made a big show of what he thinks should be done.
Solution.
Right. It probably is no one solution, obviously, no. But since then you see all this like finger pointing, right? Like, it's the crane operators, it's the truckers who are not not operating efficiently, using the time that they have available to them. From your perspective, what's happening there in Virginia, and from what you can see in your business and on the ground there, what's happening and why is it happening, and explain it to us. I mean, you alluded to it just there, like what is going on behind the scenes that is making this is causing this backlog?
It's a multitude of things. There is, like we said, there's not one solution. There's no one silver bullet, as I heard another gentleman state on another episode or another show. So let's look at the state of Virginia. We all know after the pandemic, we were hearing from all these economists that said that it's a V-shaped economy. Perhaps it won't be a U-shape or be a W-shape. You hear all the different alphabets thrown about, and I can definitely tell you it feels like a V-shaped economy in terms of how we bounce back. We took that quick nosedive down last year, 2020, maybe around that March, April, springtime. Right. And now as things are, the demand is reemerging. Suppliers, customers, they're quickly trying to restock their merchandise. So right now, we have a lot of volume of cargo flowing through our port. We have the third largest port in the East Coast, and we're gaining traction to be number 2, and hopefully the goal is to become number 1. The Port of Virginia really got ahead of a lot of the infrastructure needs to match the size vessels that have increased and the amount of freight that is being put on these mega vessels that are coming in the way of increasing their stacking capacity, being able to open up more storage availability for these large container vessels. On top of that, they received some of the largest, I think maybe the tallest ship to shore cranes that they have in the industry here at the Port of Virginia, where I think no other port can really say that. We also widened and deepened our channels through the Chesapeake Bay so we can receive some of those larger vessels. We did that all in preparedness of these mega vessels coming in and the need for more storage capacity for shipping containers. So what a lot of folks don't realize is that these steamship lines, which you may see CMA, Evergreen, Hapag-Lloyd, whatever the case, Maersk, they are allowed so many days to be able to store their containers on the port for free. I think it's typically around maybe four or 5 days is the typical number. So a lot of these containers are being stacked up on the port. So folks have to understand, just because that vessel is offloaded and that freight comes off, doesn't mean that freight is leaving immediately out of the port. A lot of times that freight is sitting there for a trucker to be able to come in. So you got so many days. And a lot of times the brokers request that you do not remove that freight until what they call the last free day. Huh. So that puts a lot of pressure on that motor carrier to realize, okay, it's last free day. I have to get that container out. And then we have to be able to store it till the warehouse is able to receive it. Another issue we're having is what we call the chassis shortage. The chassis is the frame, for those that don't know, that the container sits on when it leaves out the port. That's how we're able to transport it, is on a chassis. Well, there is a chassis shortage. Why is there a chassis shortage? Because we do have a lot of what we call the big box carriers, like Walmart and Target, for instance. We call those big box stores. They what they are doing are they're having this freight come in and then they're asking it to be stored. And so what do we have to store it on? We have to store it on these chassis after the last 3 days of the port are expired. So they've what you may have heard on any news outlets is that some of these big box stores have even chartered their own vessels. They are having their own equipment. I hear there's Walmart containers now with the name Walmart on the side. That's usually hadn't been the case. They would usually, lease these from the steamship lines. Now they're creating their own shipping containers. So we have all this happening, and this puts the driver at a disadvantage, because when you do have a driver that's available to go, there may not be a chassis, because a lot of those big box companies have these containers stored on chassis, and so there is no available. So sometimes drivers are waiting 2 hours, I've heard, just to get a chassis, and then they have to go to the port, and where they may be an extended amount of time there for the machinery to deliver the containers. And Virginia International Gateway, they did expand their port double the capacity
Okay.
in the last few years here, maybe the last 7 years or so. So, but we still have some of those older cranes, and a lot of times we see those cranes that deliver the cargo to the driver is it's at a disadvantage because they don't seem to be as efficient. In reality, they are working 24/7. These cranes, they're even when the driver gates are closed, these cranes are still operating. They're what they call grooming the stacks. In other words, they're moving freight to the front, so that when the drivers come in the morning, it's a shorter distance that the cranes have to travel to be able to put the freight on the truck driver. Then we have various rail stacks that are being occupied just by rail containers. So we have the dual operation going on. Well, actually triple, because a lot of times they have to reload those vessels as well, sometimes with empty containers or any exports that go out. So you have a vessel operation going, you have a rail operation going, and you have a truck side operation going. And sometimes a barge, but the barge is not used as frequent, as much. It's a smaller percentage of barge freight. Right. But you have all these different operations happening on the port simultaneously. So this can definitely it's a big challenge.
Combined with clearly, like we've got, like you said, the V-shaped recovery. We're it's all of it is increasing at a rate that we don't, that none of us ever see. Right. This is a new sort of volume. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of stuff, right?
Absolutely.
And you can add to those compounding issues long declining interest in intermodal work around ports, given historically depressed rates and barriers to earning opportunity there for a truck owner.
There's been a lot of restrictions on drivers throughout the years. Certain companies, your driver can only be 21 and older. Yep. Sometimes the driver has to have a couple years of experience before they do any of this line of work. And they have to have a pretty perfect driving score. So all those things coupled together makes your pool of candidates smaller. On top of that, the driver pay decades before, even last couple of decades had been significantly low. The drivers were not seeming to get the revenue that they felt was adequately needed to keep their operations, their trucking operation going, as well as feeding their families. So we always got to remember that as business owners, we receive the money, but we also got to split that between our truck business and our home life, making sure all that stuff gets taken care of. So the driver pay was significantly low. So I think with those sort of issues happening together, and then you have the newer generation who I feel just don't have a desire to do those labor intensive jobs anymore. I always tell folks, I think those young people are into becoming TikTok users, YouTube influencers, and Instagram models, and drone operators, gamers. It amazes me these young people watch other people play video games. They're into more technological occupations, things to deal with a computer or whatever the case may be. So driving a truck, taking on, Jones and Sons trucking company is really not their desire anymore. Trucking is not as appealing to young folks as maybe it was for my generation.
Yeah, so marrying those two things is possible, however. We've got plenty of examples of TikTok influencers, quote unquote, who are owner operators out there running trucks.
Right.
But anyway,
we just don't want them on TikTok while they driving. So,
exactly.
Yeah, it's a very lucrative career, especially right now with the shortage and demand that's needed for port drivers. You see bonuses out here all the time, $1,000 to $5,000 sign-on bonuses and things of that nature. So there's really a big push to get port drivers or eligible drivers.
Yeah, when it comes to like the intermodal work that you do through Pioneer and that you do with your own truck.
Right.
What is it? What's the earning potential there? Has it increased in recent years? I know we're very familiar with how like compensation has tracked over the years for owner operators that are in more over the road and or regional type operations. But when it comes to that kind of that more local sort of inter-regional kind of intermodal stuff, like what's the earning opportunity there? What does revenue for an owner operator look like over the course of a year doing that sort of work out in Virginia?
So typically, owner operators grossing about 100K a year.
Okay.
That's owner operators,
Okay.
and that's again, that's without fuel, any
Yeah.
mechanical
Right. Right.
issues, things of that nature. But I think that earning potential has risen at least by 50K on top of that right now. This is a great earning season right now. I've told the audience on our For Truckers by Truckers Facebook page the same thing, that this is the time to get into trucking or do trucking or get with a company whose rates are rising with the current market. Right now, there is an influx of potential revenue.
Yeah.
So I don't think this, potential drivers should sleep on this opportunity. I think this is the time to hop on there, and it's mostly through mileage. Some companies probably still pay a flat rate, and not too many pay hourly unless you're a company driver. So
The work that you're doing, you mean?
right, we
Yeah.
usually do a percentage based
Okay.
off the line haul, and I also tell them get with a company that's transparent. Find a company that will say, "Hey, look, I don't mind explain to you how we get to these figures," because drivers oftentimes ask, "Well, if it's 72, 75% of the line haul, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Can we actually see the real, numbers?" And if you're not with a company who's willing to do that, then you may want to reconsider where you're at. That's my personal advice.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it's a competitive market, so we have to stay within a certain range in terms of our rates. Not saying that we're looking to gouge customers or whatever the case may be, but look, the driver's rates have been so low for so long. We're wondering why we can't attract more drivers or retain drivers, because we dealt with these port congestion issues in the past when we and drivers were left to be the stool pigeons in that sense. And we were the guinea pigs basically while this whole infrastructure construction thing was happening. Just as well as I know, anytime you go through a construction zone, the speed is slower, and the terrain is a little rougher.
Yep.
It's the same thing when you do an infrastructure upgrade on the port on ports. There's drivers are going to feel the burden of the sort of that ongoing
delays getting in and out, and everything else. Yeah.
ongoing development is challenges. So we had to endure that. So with all that taking place, now that things are built up, we're ready to go. I mean, drivers really want to make that revenue that they duly deserve and have earned over these decades of low wages.
Give me a picture of what it looks like down there at you guys port, in terms of the backups that we're seeing today. Is it visible? Is it do you look out there and you see the ships just sitting out there waiting in? Are the stacks a lot higher on the port itself? Like, what does it look like?
So I think the Port of Virginia again has done a fairly good job of getting ahead of a lot of this. So
Okay.
we're not seeing the vessels that are out on the waterways. I think they're kept further out in the channel before it's time to bring them in.
Yeah.
So I would say that we do see the stacks higher. The Port of Virginia instituted this appointment system, reservation system, what have you, over the last few years. And I think that's found a way to mitigate or somehow reduce the amount of trucks coming into the port at one specific time. Because before the reservation system, if you had over the road drivers, they would come in the morning along with everybody else. And then you knew they were coming in at noon because they were just getting back from their return trip. So the ports would be highly congested around that time. So the port has found the system to be able to control the amount of trucks coming into the port at any given time. So sometimes that works as an advantage, sometimes it's a disadvantage. Some folks like it, some people hate it. It depends on who you ask in this area.
You think it's overall been a good thing, though, in terms of just kind of spreading the traffic out there?
It works well when you can keep the turn times down. Yeah. So if you're only allowing 200 trucks in at that hour, then you should be able to serve those 200 trucks a lot more efficiently than you would have if you had no control over the amount of trucks coming in. Now that you have that number, you know how many are set to you that you're going to receive within that time. You need to have the adequate labor that's going to ramp up production. It has to move more efficiently. I think there needs to be more oversight on the labor. How do we know that they're not goofing off or whatever the case may be when they're operating this equipment that is remote? Those cranes do not have human beings in there. Right, they are remotely controlled in a building, and we can't see what's happening on the other side as a port driver. You may be sitting there on the wait pad, basically where you wait for your container to come over and sat down. But sometimes that container is just sitting there dangling over your chassis, and you're wondering, well, what in the world is going on?
Right.
So I've also spoken to the port recently at a port productivity meeting we have, where I sit on as the driver representative and ask that they do an audit on the equipment that they have out on the port. I feel as though if this is $1 billion state-of-the-art port, then the technology needs to stay up with that. We need to have phones that we can reach the labor to let them know if we have a situation.
Sure.
Damaged phones and things where we can't even reach somebody is it's unhelpful. We also had to have other instruments there that are helpful for the port driver, and they have to be functioning. They cannot remain inoperable for long periods of time. We need to have a better system. Even when drivers get into the port, oftentimes they're put into a queue situation, more specifically Virginia International Gateway, where drivers have to get out of their trucks and go to each truck in that queue to find out who was last, so you can find your place in line. It's a very nerve-wracking system that has not changed. They may have increased the amount of stacks that they have. They've increased their interchange lines, but once you get in there, that design is still flawed, and it still creates frustration amongst the drivers, even to the point where it's been physical altercations. And the port has not addressed that well in my view.
And while those challenges all do exist at the Port of Virginia, George Berry said they're not to the level of congestion and frustration being experienced out west in California that we've all heard about these past several weeks. In addition to many of the same issues he detailed in Virginia, a big part of California's challenges, in his view, goes straight back to the California Air Resources Board's drayage and wider truck rule restricting port operators to run only newer model year vehicles. Those restrictions were put in place on pre-2007 emission spec engines serving the ports well before trucks running in the rest of the state, furthermore.
I can speak a little bit about California. I'm a California kid myself.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I can also see why they've sort of built this disaster chamber on their own. I know that you cannot drive a truck. I believe it's under 2011 in the state of California. Now you've limited the amount of trucks, year models that a driver can purchase. Now, folks, some of the drivers can't afford those newer trucks.
Right.
And then on top of that, then, you can't really drive. Most of these drivers are driving at night in the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles because you really can't work during the day. When the president announced 24-hour operation, well, those drivers are stuck in, have you ever been in LA traffic before? So those drivers really don't care to work during the day because of the traffic issues that, California is facing. A lot of times those drivers aren't able to go into HOV lanes and things of that nature. We're prohibited from doing that. And then you have union workers, and they have sort of a certain master contract. They're only able to work so many hours and do with so much work. So when, the countries went to these labor forces that are unionized, and I'm not here to bash unions at all, there are certain guidelines that, these ports have, these private ports or have to, or state ports have to adhere by. So you have a combination of a lot of issues, including the chassis shortage. So some of these parts for the chassis are on those vessels that are, out there in the Pacific Ocean. So they've kind of created this conundrum, in my opinion, on their own. And they're going to, when they say you make it, you're going to sit in it and stew. And that's basically what's going to happen with Los Angeles, Long Beach. So all the news reports about folks going out there and, getting their Christmas and holiday shopping in early, I strongly suggest that. The warning signs are out there.
Other factors in his home state of Virginia aren't helping much and could bring issues to his doorstep, he said.
We're probably running into the same situations here. A lot of drivers, the DMV has been backed up ridiculous out here. I know one guy, he's been waiting for over a month to just get a registration for his truck. I waited a month to get a registration for my truck.
Yeah, I heard that from some other folks in Virginia, actually.
The DMV, my goodness, they have to revamp that system entirely. Customer service is at the bottom of the totem pole.
Right. It's never been worse, right?
It's never been worse. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And so we need to see more help on that end, so we can, even the drivers that are ready to drive can drive. Intermodal at its finest. 2021 to 2022. We'll see. It's going to take a while for us to kind of swim out of this, I believe. So I think maybe by next summer we'll be seeing a little bit of the clearing.
It doesn't sound like you guys are dealing with a situation quite as dramatic as out on the West Coast, though. Eh?
No. Thank goodness.
That's container central, right? Yeah. Yeah,
right.
totally.
But I think everything, as we know, everything moves from the West comes to the East.
Yeah, right.
Wow. It's like the weather pattern. Everything that happens over there comes this way eventually. So
I know Charleston talked about putting in some emissions, some truck model year cutovs. I don't think that they did.
They did. The same thing with Virginia.
Virginia talked about it too. Yeah.
We actually, my last truck was purchased through the government Go Green program, where they gave me, I think, an estimated $20,000 towards the purchase of a new truck, as long as I salvaged my older truck.
Right.
To get it, and we also thought that there would be more benefits for owner operators that had these emissions certified trucks.
Right.
We would gain an advantage in the ports, but that never came to fruition.
What kind of advantage you were thinking? You might get some kind of
like dedicated lanes, maybe
something like that.
Some preferential treatment for being able to have these sort of these trucks that are more eco-friendly in the ports of Virginia. But
and that's your 2009 you're talking about there.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago when you.
Yes, I bought it in 2012. So this was around that time where we thought we'd be gaining some sort of advantage in the ports in our area, but nothing really. I guess it was a lot of smoke,
right?
Smoke and mirrors at the time. So I haven't really seen that transpire.
How many owner operators are you working with there, and how often are you actually getting in your truck and doing that yourself?
Right. So I have a small fleet of about 5 or so trucks.
Okay.
And it depends on when you have a situation when your drivers are going down or they're taking, a leave of absence or whatever the case may be. I may be thrust to get into the truck and sort of hold down the fort as you will. And that happens periodically. Sort of in that situation right now where, I may have to take a load tomorrow to Martinsville, Virginia, another one to Seaford, Delaware on Friday, just because I have 2 full-time staff members that I did not put on furlough. I did not lay off. I did not shorten their hours throughout the entire pandemic.
Right.
So I want to continue to be able to give them that benefit of staying employed as we weather the storm of getting, hopefully potential more drivers on, and we can increase our fleet.
Is that the biggest that you've been in terms of the fleet there, or have you gone up and down over the years?
Yeah, it's really been sort of like a roller coaster for us. We've been up to anywhere from 9 to 10 drivers at a time, and unfortunately, sometimes when you deal with staffing changes, things of that nature, you sort of deal with it. It can kind of go up and down when drivers are just trying to be in the best position for themselves as well. So.
Yep.
It has been a roller coaster for us. I think that's how business is generally with most folks. It's never going straight up.
Right.
So it's almost like the stock market. You never know.
Right.
They might crash.
Yeah.
You can go into. I'm in a bearish season right now for all my stock investments out there. That's that stock talk right there. I'm in a bear season right now.
And it's not purely local work, but it's pretty close. What you guys do, and so drivers are getting owner operators in at least your company are probably getting home every night or close to it, anyways, right?
Right, that's ideal. But some of these warehouses are dealing with staffing shortages as well, labor shortages, and that's what has sort of, sometimes keeps drivers even longer at these distribution centers. And a lot of times companies now are going to, it used to be a 2-hour market range in terms of detention.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the driver stays there at the facility. Now that's dropping down to 1 hour free. For a lot of these facilities versus the 2 hours they were granted before.
Right.
Just because the drivers don't want to be sitting there,
sure,
for, periods of time.
Well, that's good, right? I mean, I guess anything to sort of hurry folks along, give them the right kind of incentive, I guess.
Right. Drivers feel that if I'm on duty, I should be getting paid. There's no occupation I know out there where you're on duty for 2 hours and you didn't get a dime. Most times you're sitting somewhere, whatever, you still getting paid because you're on duty. And I feel that should change in this industry. Should be a 0 detention free time. You should get paid for every moment that you're working. You're there.
What's the typical rate for that that you see from folks you guys are delivering to?
I think anywhere you see companies for anywhere right now, presently, I would say anywhere from maybe $50 to $100.
Right.
Is the hourly pay for detention. So
to the truck, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That makes sense. That sounds in line with what I've heard from others and kind of tried to calculate as kind of fair compensation, for time lost, right? For income lost. Exactly. Where can folks find you, George? It's over at the Facebook page for 4 Truckers by Truckers?
4 Truckers by Truckers on Facebook. They can also find me on LinkedIn, just George Berry. It's only this guy with this smile. That's me. Or you can find us at Pioneer Transport BA on Instagram, Pioneer Transport BA on Facebook, and our website, www.pioneertransportba.com. Hey, how you like that? It's all there. So
here's a big thanks to small fleet owner operator George Berry for his time. You can find Overdrive's Niche Hauls series reporting from a couple weeks back via overdriveonline.com/tag/niche, NICHE, niche-hauls, or look for a link in the show notes for this podcast. Overdrive Radio is a production of Overdrive, the voice of the American trucker. It's edited and produced by me, Todd Dills, with no small amount of support from Overdrive Extra contributing writer Paul Marhofer, Overdrive news editor Matt Cole, social media coordinator Holly Young, and executive editor Alex Lucky.
When they say you make it, you're gonna sit in it and stew, and that's basically what's gonna happen with Los Angeles, Long Beach. So
until next time, keep it pro out there.